So without any further delay, let's jump right into the first part of this presentation, Part 1, Introduction. I'll start off with a quote that one of my former mentors, Dr. Michael Farrow, always used to begin his introductory lectures with, and that is, there will be a lot of big words used here today, but at one point in your life, somebody threw the term Tyrannosaurus Rex at you, and it didn't cause you to have a mental breakdown. So to start off, let's talk about what makes an arthropod an arthropod. To do so, we're going to talk about the arthropod body plan a little bit. First, we're going to talk about bilateral symmetry, then cephalization, segmentation, tagmatization, jointed appendages, and then finally the exoskeleton. First, bilateral symmetry. Something that has bilateral symmetry has a left side that looks a lot like the right side. So you can see in this beetle, the left side of the beetle looks a lot like the right side of the beetle. Alternatives to bilateral symmetry are things such as radial symmetry, which you can see in this coral, which means that it has symmetry about a circle. You could slice it up into a circle and it would be equal or approximately equal parts. And some things that are asymmetric or have no symmetry, such as this sponge, doesn't really have any line that you could put through it to make one half look like the other one. Second concept we have to talk about is the concept of cephalization, which comes from the Greek kephalos, meaning head. And this concept comprises two different parts. First, cephalization includes the presence of a central nervous system. So you can see, like in this leech, there is a centralized brain and a ventral nerve cord. They're all centrally located. Whereas in this hydra, you have kind of a nerve net, and in the sea star, you've got a nerve ring and a radial nerve. The central nervous, or the nervous system in these organisms are not centralized. And then the second part of all of this is that cephalization includes sensory organs which are located on an anterior head. So you've got things like eyes on this flatworm in the front of this, or the anterior of this organism, or antenna on this insect on the anterior head of this organism. The third thing that distinguishes arthropods is segmentation. So basically you've got repeated segments along the body of an arthropod. Fourth thing, and this is the thing that separates arthropods from all other similar groups, is the concept of tagmatization. And this is just the presence of tagma, or plural, tagmata. And a tagma is simply a specialized grouping of multiple segments which form a functional morphological unit. So for example, the head is a tagma. The head and the thorax and the abdomen are tagmata. The next concept that we have to talk about is that of jointed appendages. This is another thing that separates arthropods from other similar groups. As a matter of fact, the term arthropod comes from arthron, which means joint, and podos, which means feet or legs. So the name arthropod literally means jointed feet. And as you can see in this basic insect leg, there are numerous segments that are defined by joints or separated by joints within the legs of all arthropods. The final concept we have to talk about here is the concept of the exoskeleton. This is also something that separates arthropods from all other similar groups. Arthropod exoskeletons are made of chitin, which is a multiplied polysaccharide. Often this chitin exoskeleton is enforced with calcium carbonate or sclerotin, which is simply linked proteins. There's a trade-off with exoskeletons. First, the exoskeleton provides protection and various attachment points for muscles. But at the same time, this outer skeleton that's hard has to actually be molted in order for the arthropod to grow. And it also requires a good deal of energy for them to synthesize these things. But this is also a feature that defines arthropods, is this molted exoskeleton. So the next thing we need to talk about is, why do arthropods matter? I mean, who really cares about all this stuff? They're not us. They're small little things sometimes that just seem kind of meaningless. And there's actually several reasons why we study arthropods. The first reason that we study arthropods is that, in truth, Earth is an arthropod-dominated planet. In fact, there are about a quintillion insects alive at this moment. That's approximately 160 million insects for each person on Earth. Secondly, most of the diversity of life on Earth is invertebrates. And most of that invertebrate life on Earth is arthropods. Secondly, arthropods function as an integral and often understudied part of food webs. Understanding arthropods and their lives can tell us a lot about higher organisms on the food webs or about ecosystems on the whole. The third reason why we study arthropods is that they can actually be quite interesting. Arthropod diversity is rather large, and since they do compose such a large percentage of life on Earth, they are actually a pretty interesting topic to study. I mean, and there are some beautiful life forms out there that are just kind of fascinating and weird and fun to deal with. So the next thing we need to talk about is the evolution of arthropods. Where exactly did they come from? The answer to this question is buried about 542 million years ago at a point called the Cambrian explosion. And this is a point in time where there was a massive, abrupt, revolutionary radiation, and most of the phyla that we know today actually arose. And we went from this kind of marine, soft-bodied forms that were mostly sessile or stayed in one place, to a bunch of hard-body, more mobile forms, such as mollusks or echinoderms, which include things like starfish, chordates, which include fishes and us and birds, and arthropods. So, what exactly is the ancestry of arthropods? Well, once upon a time we used to think that arthropods were closely related to other things that were also segmented. And this is annelid worms, or your earthworms. And we separated arthropods out with the annelids as a single group, and placed all of our other invertebrates below this, which is our mollusks and our nematodes and stuff like that, because these two groups were segmented. But these days, we now know that arthropods are actually a little bit closer to a group called the nematodes, or roundworms. And the thing that unites these two groups is this molted exoskeleton, or cuticle. And together, these two groups form a larger group called ecdysozoa. Ecdysis is the process of molting, and then that means that ecdysozoa are molting animals. Zoa coming from zoo, or animal. Our annelid worms, on the other hand, are actually a little bit closer to our mollusks, so things like snails and clams. And this group down here are united by what's called a trochophore larvae, which are these guys in the corner here, into a group known as Lophotrochozoa. So here's the arthropod family tree in the broadest sense of arthropods. The onychophorans are actually kind of outside of the arthropods, and there's some disagreement over where exactly they belong. But for the rest of this discussion, we're going to talk mostly about the bottom of this tree. These orders down here contain terrestrial living arthropod taxa. Sorry, these classes down here contain terrestrial living arthropod taxa. So we're going to continue our discussion with these groups. And here is the first of a couple of trees that I'm going to show you. This is a tree of all arthropods, kind of a simplified tree diagram. And at present, in this discussion, we're down here at ring number 1. And we're going to progress up through these rings, and when we get up to 8, I'm actually going to introduce you to a second, little bit more complex tree, and we're going to talk about the hexapods at that point, or more broadly, in a more narrow sense, the insects. Before we go, I'm just going to throw this slide up here. I'm hoping that it may be useful to you. These are just a couple of general anatomy terms that kind of orient you around a creature's body, or a creature with bilateral symmetry's body. And, you know, feel free to pause the video and look at this or come back to it as you like. I'm not going to really go through this in a bunch of detail. These terms can be useful as you're going through stuff, and this just seemed like a good place to put it in.